Howdy folks, and welcome back to another intermediate Blender beginners class. Today we're going to be looking at UV mapping. So let's get on with it, shall we? You can see I've got my default cube here, and you can see we've got a material assigned to it, which is great. Just to let you know, I'm actually using something called Node Wrangler. You can enable that by going to Preferences and typing in Node, finding Node Wrangler, and just putting a tick on it and going to the Preferences and saving them. I'll show you a little bit more about that later on anyway, when we get to the shader, working with the shader or the nodes. So first of all, let's begin by unwrapping our cube, and to do that, just to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on, I'm going to go to the UV editor and I'm going to select a new texture. I'm going to call it UV map. We've got an option here to generate a blank texture with alpha. We don't actually need alpha, but there's also, if you click on the generator type, there's also some nice options for a color grid, which is a grid of colored squares, or a UV grid, which is a kind of less attractive grid. So let's go with the UV grid and say OK, and you can see that it's done that now. So back into the 3D window, I'm just going to press U. Oh no, I'm not. I'm going to go into edit mode first, and I'm in sculpt mode for some obscure reason, so let's go to edit mode. So I've got all my faces selected, and you can actually see that it's already unwrapped my UV map, and you won't actually, if I go into the kind of preview mode, you won't actually see it on the cube because we need to associate a texture node with the material that we're using at the moment. So we can go into our shader editor, just get rid of that sidebar. So you can see we've got our shader here, and to add in a texture node we can press Control T, I think it is. And did I add in two? I might have done. What have we got there? Texture coordinate, yeah, I think I've got two there. So we can just delete the extra one that we don't want. So you can see we've got our texture coordinates, UV coordinates, onto a mapping node through an image texture, and we just need to select our texture option there and choose UV map, and there you can see we've got our cube nicely UV mapped. Now if I go back to the UV editor, there's various ways of unwrapping any given mesh, but let's say we didn't particularly want that configuration of unwrap. We can go back to the UV editor, not UV editor window, 3D window, and just choose reset, and you can see that that's reset our UVs. If I go to edge mode, I can mark some seams, or will be seams. So if I highlight those edges and go to edge and then mark seam, you can see they're selected. and then press U and do an unwrap, you should see, let's try that again, reset U, unwrap. There you can see it's unwrapped it in a somewhat different direction now, but it's following the seams to actually do the unwrap. There are a few other UV unwrap options which we could just discuss briefly. If I do a reset on that, when you press U, you can see you've got Smart UV Project. That just tries to pack the unwrap it in a sensible way to make the most of the space. It doesn't actually guarantee that faces won't overlap on the UV map. The light map pack is more for kind of baking on lighting. That will pack each face into its own particular area and do its best to make sure that there's no overlapping faces on the UV map. There's also follow active quads, which will try and keep the faces when it unwraps as quad shapes, as square shapes. We can show that probably somewhat easier by adding a UV sphere. Let's go back to our shader editor. Oh, I don't think we've got a shader on that at the moment, so let's go back to properties, give it a material. Let's go back to the shader editor, and as we did before, we'll do a Control T. Oh, we're getting 2 again. That's interesting. Okay. Let's get rid of one. And as we did before, we can just choose our texture. So you can see we've got an unwrap there. Let's go to our UV editor, into edit mode, and it actually, you can see that that's done a pretty good job of unwrapping the texture, but you can see that those faces aren't actually, they're kind of distorted, they're not actually squares. So in order to get around that, what we can do is we can select a single face. We can go to follow active quads, which, as I say, will try and keep it square, and we can choose even to keep the sides even and say OK. And it doesn't look as if it did much, but you can see we've got our square there. Now if we select the whole sphere, we can do our follow active quad unwrap again, choose even, and now you can see that it's unwrapped it in a nice regular rectangular shape that we could, I just get my 3D cursor up, stick it in the middle somewhere and scale it down, making sure that I'm using the 2D cursor to do it with. Oops, scroll in a bit so I can see what's going on. And you can see that there we've got quite a nice UV unwrap. Let's have a look at some of these other options. Cube projection means it will unwrap the UV map from 6 different directions: top, bottom, left, right, front, back, as if it's being projected onto a cube. Cylinder projection will unwrap it like a label on a tin can, if you like, so they're wrapping around the cylindrical side. Sphere projection is kind of like what we have at the moment, actually. Project from view is very handy. I tend to use it more for complicated shapes, so if we get rid of this shape, get rid of this mesh, let's see if we can add in a monkey. Monkey, there we go. And let's go to properties, make sure it's got a texture, go to the shader editor, see if we can give it a, oh, only got one that time, that's good. Put a UV map on it. Right, so well, it's, you can see it's not brilliantly UV mapped. Let's have a look and see how it's done that. So if we go to edit mode, select it all. Actually, it's not done a bad job of it. You can see we've got the eyeballs, the ears, and the face. Yeah, that's actually not a bad job of it. But you can see that if I go to properties, let me just see if I can change my world settings so that you can see a little bit more clearly what we're looking at. There we go. You can see that some of the areas, for example the ears, the back of the head, the UV map isn't, or the squares aren't kind of that regular in size, so you've got some distortion. You can see we've got a bit of stretching towards the bottom of the jaw there, where there's kind of great big squares. There's very small ones on the ears, so it's given us a clue that the texture's not brilliantly kind of distributed on the mesh. So let's see how we might counteract that. So let's go back to our UV window. I'm just going to reset those UVs. Excellent. Now I'm going to mark some seams on here. So I'm just going to go around the face. That was a pretty good one. And I'm just going to mark that seam. So edge, and we need to do a mark seam. There we go. And I'm going to try and select just okay, I've just used my select link, so I'm only selecting the thing within the seam boundary in front of the face. So now we can, because that's selected, we can just unwrap that, and we can say we want to do it as a project from the view, from the current view. And you can see that that's perhaps a nicer unwrap, as the squares are much more regular. And similarly, you could do the same from, you know, the different viewpoints. You might want to mark a seam just on, say, the, you know, the head. So let's try doing that. We will go down to there. Oops. If I can manage to mark a seam all the way round. We'll mark it down to there. And maybe we'll mark that bit and that bit. and we could put some seams around the ears if we wanted to. I'm not going to bother doing that because I can't be asked really. So, and it would help if I could unselect that seam now, but it's being problematic. There we go. So let's mark that seam. And let's do a select. Yep, so this isn't going to be a great example because we've got the ear sticking out, but we could have put a seam around the ear and unwrap that. So now with that selected, we can try another UV unwrap. It's not going to be great actually. We could maybe try it from that angle, so we get the bulk of the head. So we could do U, project from view. You can see there's a bit of stretching underneath, so you might kind of put a seam halfway through and then map it from the direction we're looking at it now. But you can see from the area we've just selected that that's not too bad an unwrap. The faces are using roughly the same texture space as they are on the front of the mesh. Anyway, so it's just really a matter of kind of breaking your mesh down into discrete sections and trying to find the best usage of your UV map. Let me just show you. So if I go here and I press L on that one, you can see that we've got our UV meshes kind of overlapping each other there. So if you did want to move those out or separate them somewhat, let me just unselect those. So you can do the same thing on the cursor. I don't want to do that. On the mesh, so we can select a vertices vertex and press L to give us a linked, and then we can move it away from our UV map. Oh, I think I just pressed the wrong button there. I'll just do a Control Z on that. So you can see that we've got the option to organise these. You can see we've got the option to organise these however we want within the UV space. You do have an option to pack islands, which will try and repack the UV map sensibly within the UV space. Don't know if I can show you that. Let me try it. So if I select everything and do edge, I'm going to clear the seams on that. I'm going to go U and do a reset. I'm just going to do a plain old ordinary unwrap on that. Oh, that's horrible. Let's try a reset. Let's try a smart UV project. That normally works quite well. Just accept the defaults. Okay, so don't know if you can see that. But let me mess around with that. So let's try a back islands, and as you can see, it kind of, after I moved it, it packs it all as best it can into the space that's provided. Anyway, I hope that has helped you a little bit with, see, that's a lovely unwrap. Not bad at all. There's very little distortion on that, so smart UV unwrap is a good option, certainly for more complex shapes like our monkey head. Anyway, I hope that's helped you with your UV unwrapping, and don't forget, give us a like, tune in next time for next week's episode of Intermediate Blender Class, and thank you for watching. Bye for now.